Hi there, I'm Eric Rhodes, publisher of Fine Art Connoisseur and Plein Air magazine. Got a treat for you today. You know, when we're out painting, landscape painting, we oftentimes encounter a barn or a building, and sometimes, I don't know about you, but my paintings look a little wonky. The perspective is off, it looks either too stiff or it doesn't look right. Well, we ask an architectural rendering specialist, Stewart White, who is also an excellent watercolor painter, to teach us on video how to do watercolor architecture. Now, quite frankly, this video applies to anybody who does architecture, whether you're painting in any medium, oil, acrylic, watercolor, or otherwise, pastel, etc. So we hope you enjoy this segment today.
Hi, I'm Stewart White, and I'm very excited to be doing this video about painting architecture with watercolor. My background is in architectural illustration, and my experience in that field was always about putting in lots of detail, lots of information for the architects and the developers. In painting in plein air, all that stuff is not important anymore. It's all about the light. The details are not as important. Whether you have the right amount of windows and doors, that's not important. It's all about the light on the forms. It's the shadows across the face of a building. It's the shadows from a building onto a building. There's something about the forms that draw me into the picture that I'm about to paint. For example, this morning I was on an errand. It's early morning out here in Austin. And as a ray of light came through the clouds, and it illuminated the whole skyline of Austin, which is absolutely beautiful. I didn't get caught up in all the windows and doors and all the things. It's just the shape of the skyline. And those kind of experiences are a human emotional response to architecture. How do I take that response and make a painting out of it and try to capture that emotional impulse? I want to study a particular piece of architecture that's in Italy. It's called the Duomo in a town called Todi. There's a lot of buildings to paint in your own backyard, but it's particularly fun to be traveling, to set up an easel and paint a beautiful piece of architecture. So what we're going to be learning in here is having the confidence to do that, the confidence to analyze a building, the confidence to draw, to keep things in proportion. And we're going to be learning an awful lot about, I'd like to say, pretending, because you really got to have confidence when you get out in front of people. And the best way to have confidence is to pretend you really know what you're doing. And it never hurts to pretend you're better than you are. All right, before we get started, there's a couple of things we need to talk about, and that's having a plan. Because without a plan, you're really going to be just moving with every little thought that comes into your mind. And we're going to do that with like little sketches, little thumbnails, postcard size studies. So we're going to talk about planning, composing your painting, where you want to go, what colors you want to mix. And so you have all that stuff already figured out. And so you can start with confidence. So let's get started with that right now. So imagine we're standing on some steps in a piazza in Todi, and we're looking at the Duomo. And so how do we analyze this? How do we break this down? Where do we start drawing this onto our painting? Well, first let's just look at what it is that's beautiful about this. You have to answer that question for yourself. So I'm just going to do a quick analysis. It's sort of a geometry thing. It's simple geometry. And I think it's fun to look at the face of a building and see what kind of underlying harmonies are working in this. And this one has an awful lot of really nice things going on. First, you might look at that form and say, well, it's a big square with a big round window in the center and a couple of doors and a center door. But there's really a lot more going on. It's not really a square. It's more of the face is a little more of a rectangle. But let's just draw over the top of this and see what we have here. First, we've got the the main face of the building, often called the facade. And we have a tower, and this is in the back. And those are our big shapes. So if we want to find the center point, you could probably go to the top of that arc, but if you wanted to, you just join the corners. I'm going to use a little triangle here for that is the center of our form. We'll just put C there for center. And that seems to fall right where that first line is. So if you bisect that rectangle, then you've got two equal rectangles, and we have 4 quadrants, and that will help you start to place the different items that are on that face. Like, for example, the main thing that jumps out at me is this wonderful round window. So that sort of kisses the top part of that form, and that's where that would go. We've got broken up into 3 points here. So we'll just take that to just get the big idea. Then we know that this arch right here just comes right underneath that part here. And this big opening right here is really our main idea. This is a church, and the idea of these big doors was to welcome people in. And there's actually kind of a face here that I think is quite amusing. Well, not that amusing, but I think it's a friendly face. And I think that's what the architect had in mind. These little nuances of things that happen, these don't exactly line up over these secondary doors, but the point is these are sort of squeezed in together to reinforce this sort of equal space between the openings. And that's about all you need to know about that. And the steps, how high are they? They're actually, you want to break this down, it's probably 1/4 of the whole form. So if that's 1, 2, 3, 4. And that's your form. So once you've got that figured out and drawn out, we have to look at what kind of composition do we want. And one of the things I like to do are these small little postcard size studies. And I don't like to spend a lot of time on them. It's just moving things around, and it gives me an idea of what I'm going to be getting before I invest in spending a whole lot of time on a big painting. One of the things I like about this is you can start to get your palette worked out at this point. So we're looking at composition, we're looking at planning our palette, and we're looking at where we want this thing oriented. I might like it a little more vertical. In fact, when I try this out, I do think it's a more dynamic composition to show the whole tower, perhaps a bit of light at the top of it, a darker, cooler blue in the sky, and a little bit of foreground. The original plein air painting I did, I'd almost cut that all off. I don't mind this composition, but I think it could be better in the exercise we're going to do. Another good way to do a rehearsal is just use one tone and try to get all these things connected. I don't use more than 3 tones. To be your darks, the medium tone, and the white of the paper. And then if you really wanted to know, is this going to work, then I would just do a small postage size stamp. And that usually tells me, pretty much like looking at a contact sheet, that catches your eye, that's a strong composition, and that's a good direction to go. Okay, first thing we're going to talk about is the materials we're going to work with. I love art supplies, who doesn't? The difficult thing is to try to limit yourself to just a few items when you do a painting, but I do collect a lot of art supplies. First thing I think that people want to know is, well, what colors do I use for making a painting? And I could go through all the formulas of what colors you use, but the important thing is to just remember 4 things: lighter, darker, cooler, warmer. So any of the colors that you have in your palette, and I'll go through them. Do I want a cooler color? Do I want a warmer color? Do I want it lighter? Do I want it darker? And somewhere in there, you're going to find the right color that you need. If you've already done your pre-planning and you've decided what your palette's going to be, stick to that and you won't go wrong. Let's talk about paint. The thing about these beautiful paints that you can squeeze out of the tubes is that they went to a lot of effort to get this stuff out of mud and out of earth, to get them nice and clean. And you don't want to go take your paints, muddy them up, add more and more stuff to them until they've gone back to where they came from, which is the earth. So I would encourage you to treat these paints like it was gems that come out of the tubes. So first of all, I will go to a couple of the warm colors and talk about them. I have a color called Jaune Brillant, number 2, or Brilliant Yellow. It's a great paint for just doing sidewalks and warm streets, and it's kind of a Naples yellow color. You could use Naples yellow as well. Then I have a bright lemon yellow that I occasionally use for traffic cones, raincoats, umbrellas, different things that sparkle. It also works for making all your greens a little more believable. Then I've got the cadmium yellow medium or cadmium yellow deep, either one. You thin it out. It looks kind of greenish when you put it down, but just once it dries, it's a very, very warm color. The greenish part is the water mixing with the paper, and it's starting to get gray. So don't let it disturb you when you start laying it down. Just do lots of little samples of what cadmium yellows look like when they dry. Then I have cadmium orange, and again, it's a fantastic color when you thin it out. It just about warms up anything, and it's great for enhancing sparkle to a certain area. Next is any kind of red. There's millions of reds out there. Take a vermilion, a cad red medium, scarlet. It doesn't matter. We're just going to use it for whatever we need as a complement to greens and for warming anything up. Then I have a container here for white. I use a tempera or gouache white. I generally don't squeeze it onto the palette, but I like to take the paint right out of the mouth of the tube and lay it in there. And this is where I would use this instead of using frisket, or latex frisket. Then I've got yellow ochre, which I use a lot of. It's generally one of the most practical, warm yellows, earths that are out there. So I go through a lot of yellow ochre. And then sepia, which is great for darkening just about anything. Then a quinacridone gold, which it's a very, very strong gold color, and is great for just toning down blues and creating these greens. As with all these colors, you need to do charts and practice seeing what they do to each other when they overlap or when they bleed into each other. And we can do some little exercises later in the video about color mixing. Then I've got a burnt sienna and a sienna scarlet, cobalt violet, which isn't very strong, but it adds a little something to whatever you add it to. It has a more granular effect, and I just use it for softening different things. I don't do a lot of violet stuff. Then I have an olive green or a green gold. Any one of those is great. Then it's a viridian, which is not very strong, but it has a beautiful, cool quality to it. Then I'll use cerulean. And this is a cobalt teal. It's kind of mixed in with a horizon blue. Then I use a lavender. I think several companies make this. It's a generally cloudy violet color. It's very cool. I've found it very useful. And here I have a verditer blue. I'm sure I'm not pronouncing that right, but it's V-E-R-D-I-T-E-R. And it's just another warmer blue like a cerulean. And I have a royal blue, which is very strong pigmentation, and I'll just use that for darks. It's way too strong to just use straight. But if you add a little carmine to it or sepia, it makes a terrific dark. Then I've got cobalt blue and ultramarine blue, which is a little harsher than the cobalt blue. And here I have an Imperial Purple, or you can use any of the violets, and I don't use that too often straight, but it's nice to just have it in your palette to cool up your blues. And then I have a Carmine, or a Alizarin Crimson is about the same color. And then I've kind of finished up here with the neutral tint, or any of the dark grays that are out there. So I like a palette that has enough mixing areas in it. I can hold it by the thumb here. This is made by Holbein. But you can use a plastic palette just as well. They're lightweight. Just kind of take soap and water and clean that off before you start using them new, because the paint tends to sizzle on top of those palettes. And you can spend anywhere between $6 for a palette or $1,200 for a palette. I'm not spending $1,200 on a palette. So again, you can use a plate. I've used a sushi plate before, and it works just great. Porcelain's a terrific surface to use watercolor on. Other materials it's nice to have is like an old toothbrush for doing splattering, a little spray bottle for wetting an area, keeping an area wet, or just for special effects. And another really handy thing to have, I find, is these dividers. And this is just a way of seeing if you've got everything equal, your floor heights, whatever like predominant lines you see, you can put these on if it repeats itself. And this is just to keep you in the neighborhood. You don't have to get too exact about this, because they already have computers that'll do that for you. One of the things I like to do is I like to have some straight lines. You don't want to make too many ruled lines on your painting because they start to stand out from the rest of the hand-drawn work. But this is an architect's scale that broke in transit, but it's actually a perfect size for doing straight lines, and I'll demonstrate. What you do is take your fingernail and run it down this groove that's in the center of the scale. And then take your brush and just setting it on the surface of the paper, keeping the ferrule along the edge of your ruler, you can do a series of straight lines. Let me turn this angle here. And just keep repeating. And this may come in handy when we're doing a whole series of steps. And while it's still wet, you can sort of embellish a few of these things so it doesn't look so mechanical. If you don't have one of these things, doing straight lines can just be a matter of taking the butt edge of your brush and just leading it to where you want to go. It's not quite as straight, but it'll look just fine. And this is handy when you have to do a lot of boat masts and flagpoles, telephone lines, those sort of things. Okay, let's talk about brushes. I don't want to use too many brushes, but I come across brushes. I have to buy them all. I have to try them all out because they all make different marks. Whether that brush is expensive or cheap, it doesn't really matter if it's a great brush or not. If you like the mark that it makes, then that's a brush you should use. I like this particular brush, and it's got a big body, and then it comes to a fine point in there. And what this can do is it does a lot of crazy stuff that's unpredictable, which I really happen to like. You can get really thin things out of it. You can go in. You could, for trees and things like that, it's a very handy brush to have for little details. It holds a lot of pigment. Very handy. This is probably the most common, is the round, and this is a 10. You probably don't need anything smaller than that. Another very handy brush to have is the big mop. This is a 16. Very nice brush, and this is just to lay in everything that you need to get going and show the painting who's boss. I'll use it for doing large areas, but it can also come to a fine point. and I'll demonstrate how it works. But I'll probably use this brush in just about every painting I work in. You can bring it down and then also come around things. It comes to a point. It's a very expressive brush, and I use it for almost 80% of the painting. Another brush I like to have, particularly for architecture, is one that has a flat edge. And this is a flat, always gone. And it also has a chiseled end at the handle. And what you can do with this sometimes is to relieve paint from where you want it, like the edges of a window or a door, or anything where you don't want paint to go. You can just keep scraping it. And you can also use the point to just draw in it, and then it starts darkening up things, and there's any number of applications for that, like twigs, wrought iron, those sort of things. Another handy thing, after the painting's finished, you can just do little touch-ups with a watercolor marker, and that you can lay down, and you can also dissolve it, just so it doesn't look so markerish. Okay, well, those are the basics of a painting, but there's other things you might be interested in having in your kit. Is a collapsible water holder. I like to use a red filter from a camera that I used to have. You can use just a piece of red acetate, or I think they have these scale things that they come with it. But what this does is it breaks all the colors out of your image, and all you see are the values. So very handy to have one of those. I like to have a couple of thicknesses of masking tape, because you could use thin stuff for areas where you want to hold back on painting it and have a nice crisp edge. So a 1/2 inch, or a little bit, I think this is an 1/8 inch tape. And your 3/4 inch. When you go to an art supply store, they have everything you need, but I really like finding materials out of other areas. Like Army Navy stores have like the best gear, stuff for carrying stuff. And you can make your own equipment, which I really advise, because it's, well, it makes it kind of personal. This is a Belgian Army canteen and holder. You can't just get them anywhere. you can find American canteens, and I think they're very portable, and you don't need special water holders and things like that. I like using these shop blue towels, because you can always take them, put them in water, rinse them out, and they'll last forever. You don't need rolls and rolls of paper towel. They don't spread lint. They don't come apart. They're super strong, and I love them. Okay, so we have our materials, we have our plan, we know what we're going to do. We've gone through the dress rehearsal of doing a study. It's time to quit stalling. So we're going to talk about drawing and how important it is to the final look of your painting. All right, now we're into the drawing part. And if you can paint without drawing on a paper, well then, more power to you. I can't do it. I really rely on an underlying skeleton for my paintings. And I consider the drawing a part of the finished look of the painting. I'm not going to try to erase anything. I want to try to make that line be as expressive as the paint strokes, or anything that I should add to this. That line is just as important. So with that in mind, I want to just talk a little bit about drawing, is how to draw a line that's like pleasant to look at. There's no real beauty in scratching away at something and seeing all those lines and then erasing them just so that you have a vague idea of what you're doing. The lines that I'm using are just going to give me a map of where I need to go, where I need to paint, what shapes that I'm working with, and where to stop a wash, and where windows are located at, how deep are they, things like that you can all get from a pencil line. I like using these mechanical pencils just because you can keep throwing out more lead when you wear it down, and you can have some sense of control over the thickness of the line. So let's get started. I'm going to try to transfer one of my postcard sketches here. And what I'm going to be doing is like, where's my center? And so we do a little crisscross, and there's my center point, and what's along that line? And I try to find that here in my final piece. Then I try to break that up to where's the top of the building. Well, that's almost half the distance there. And where are the main perspective lines? And I'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. And where are the big areas of dividing up my page? So let me get started here. I see that this roof line comes up to the top corner, so that gives me a good idea of where to start. And when I'm in front of a building, I'm looking at the contour, the outside shapes and what they look like. I'm not really blocking in thing. I'm just following lines. So here we go. I notice that the tower is short of the center line here, so that's pretty much what I'm doing here. And I try not to get too worried about exactitude, because that's not really the point unless the people at the church commissioned you to do this painting, and then they're going to want to see it exact. So here we go. And I sort of draw my objects with light and dark, like putting a little pressure on it when I feel confident that that's where I want that line to be. And if I'm not sure, I just sort of ease up on the pressure of the pencil. So what that center point was right here. And there's a predominant line of the building. And since I've already analyzed this, I know that there's a certain relationship that these lines have to each other. So, the lines that I'm putting in here, I don't want to get too caught up in little balustrades or little details of different things or how many steps are there. I just want to get the big shapes in there, and I know that I can get all that detail in later. So I'm going to establish that this is my ground plane, and I want to establish where my eye is. Now, why do I want to do that? Because wherever my eye is, that's my horizon line. And if I shift over somewhere, my horizon line stays the same. But if I get down on my knees, my horizon line lowers with me. So I need to find like a reference point of where everything in this image is in relationship to me, the viewer, how I'm looking at it. So I'm at a point where I'm standing almost right at the edge of this building, and that point and where my eye is my vanishing point. And so everything goes to that. If I'm a building parallel to me, the vanishing point is going to go right down to that point. If it's at an angle, vanishing points will start to move and change along that horizon line. If I'm standing on level ground and I'm looking at somebody ahead of me, their eyes and head are at the same level that mine is. And they may be closer up, so they'll be, the eyes are still at the same line, but their feet will drop down here into the foreground. If there's a car parked over here, and let's just say there is, we'd say, well, where would that fit? Well, most cars, you can pretty much look over the hood, so your eyesight's going to be just a little bit above where most cars are. So you put that in there, and that car goes, it's got its back to us, take my word for it. So we have established some figures, and when these figures are about there, they're going back in space. Now up here, they're going to be above my eye level. So I like to establish kind of how big a person is right from the get-go, because that's going to set up my scale for the whole thing. This might be a little bit too big. So, okay, from there, I remember I analyzed that we broke it up into 3 parts, with the center part is practically a square right here. So our main focus point was this light on the facade of the building. So I want to get the basic idea of here without getting caught up in a lot of detail. I generally like to see, what are the big patterns. If this round window has you can count all the little spires and stuff, but just sort of break it up like you would a clock face. And just get the basic ideas. And I can draw in this part because I know I'm going to put a lot of shade right in there, but I don't want to put a lot of drawing where I want sunlight to fall on. So keep that in mind, that you may see the detail with your eye, but leave off drawing on it so you can use that as clean white paper to give it that effective, what dimension, that really pops out right there, even at that small scale. So, unfortunately, we're not in Italy, and I couldn't be referring to where I'm getting all this information. But there are these little dimensional pilasters here that are going to have a large impact on how the shadows are cast on this. If there is a little face on that little thing, don't bother drawing it. It's not important. Don't get distracted with all those little details. Now, the big point is this very welcoming church door, and it has these various sculptural elements throughout it. We might want to open the door here, so I'm going to leave that for the painting side when I get to the painting stage. Okay, then this was centered here with these rondelles, so we get those in. And then just below it, we put in these, I'd say like they're bookends to the big door. I think the thing to think about in drawing is that your lines should be interesting to look at. That the thick and thin is what indicates sort of an in and out on a shape, whether what comes forward and what goes, what recedes. Another thing I kind of like to do with a painting is to ask myself if there's some kind of a narrative here, some kind of story that I could kind of make up or pretend to make this come more alive to me. For example, supposing this church just let out and there are the acolytes and the priest and everybody has come pouring out of the door. Maybe that is an assemblage of people out here, and that the choir's wearing red and white robes. And those little red marks can be little bits of jewelry on your painting that can draw you into it. Okay. So just indicating a few things, just so I know when I'm painting, not to go painting over little white areas that I need. A little detail for balustrades. Now, I have these steps here, and I decide, well, where do I put people? And it's a random choice. It's anything you could do, but if you could start making them random, or you can actually help yourself out by having some form where everybody's arranged here. So what I like to do is, just so I don't have to think about it too much, is just pick a number, like a 3 or a 5 or a 4. Let's take a 4, for example. And I just write a light number 4 right here. And I'll just use that as sort of a guide for where I want people to be standing on the stairs. And why numbers? You could use letters. Anything that just gives you some kind of contained order to where you're going to be putting all these figures. And there. And you can see my figures are just bell shapes with a little dot for a head and a little something trailing below it. Then I start just adding a few random people here and there. Maybe there are some tourists in town that are climbing up the stairs over here. And for right now, I'll just kind of leave that. I'll put a few figures here. And when you're doing a figure, is try to think what it's doing. Create a gesture for that figure. Perhaps it's a couple that's gone shopping, so they've got a bag of some stuff. Maybe they're carrying some flowers. These figures are there just there for placement. You can get into more detail later when you're doing the paintings. Okay, well let's indicate where the trees are in here. There's a couple of forms, not important. Maybe, tell you what, then we put a big umbrella in here somewhere, because maybe it's market day. And there's a figure bent over, adjusting all the fruits and vegetables. So you're the director of this painting. You can do whatever you want to. You can move people where you want them. The trouble is it's watercolor, and we don't want to erase things once you've put them down, because it'll make a mark on the surface of your paper and it'll show up. And so that is the unforgiving quality of this material. Okay, from this vanishing point we are here, I'm going to just put out a few radiating lines that come out, because this building is going to be along my side here, and it's parallel to that, so I'm going to put that. And the other buildings start to bend around. So I've got a balcony right here, and that line will line up and keep going into my vanishing point right here. And there's a door. And then there's a couple of arched openings down here. And I'm going to just change the height on some of these because they're looking really tall. Okay. So if you have the umbrella, try to bring things through behind things so it creates some depth there. And I'm going to just put a few more lines here for potentially putting in paving stones and bollards, maybe all kind of things inside this space. It's a shame we're not in Italy. I could just point out things and say, well, that's good, let's keep that. If we don't like it, doesn't help our painting, we just edit it out. We don't need it. Okay, I think for now, does this give us enough information to get started? I think it does. I think we might want to create some scale a little bit here just with the steps. And that's about really all you need. And so now it's the part that we've been dreading, which is starting the painting. And I say dreading because why would you ruin a perfectly white piece of paper by staining it with a lot of different colors? And the reason I say it's nerve-wracking to start a painting, because once you get going, it's like you can't get off. It's the ride as it gets going. And I'm going to help you get the confidence to jump into the big washes.
Hi, I'm Stewart White, and welcome to my watercolor demo. In this demo, I'm going to show you how to paint architecture with watercolor confidently and with a plan. What I think is holding a lot of people back in watercolor is the lack of confidence in starting out on a big white sheet of paper. Also, I think what's holding back in doing architecture is being able to handle all the different details, perspective, and the different angles. And forgetting that the main point of painting architecture is painting the light. Light is the main thing that we want to get out of this video. What's unique about my demo is that I'll be able to show you how to analyze architecture, how to break it down into its simplest forms, how to take complicated detail and make it readable, understandable, and yet very easy to do. I think the artists that would get the most out of this are those artists that love to paint either a well-known landmark or a modest little country village or a turn in the street. It's not as complicated as you think. Most things in life aren't. We just make them very complicated in our own heads. I think when you see that, I can put together a painting. I'm pretty sloppy when I paint, but actually it all kind of comes together. You just need to follow the paint and see what it wants to do. So join me as we explore painting architecture in watercolor.
Well, that is architecture in watercolor, but of course it applies to all mediums, because whether you're sketching or oil painting, it's the drawing part that's really going to help you get that architecture right. And I hope you enjoyed that little segment from Stewart White. If you want to learn more about this new video, the full-length video, you can go to streamline.art, and please know that there's a discount for you today only, and that code can be found up in the comments section. Now, we're going to get right to our interview with Stewart White. Hi, I'm Eric Rhodes, publisher of Fine Art Connoisseur and Plein Air magazine. Our guest today is the great watercolorist Stewart White. Stewart, welcome.
Thank you.
We're glad to have you here.
It's wonderful to be here. I'm loving it.
You know, you have an uncanny ability, unlike anybody I've seen, to really handle architecture. You do such a beautiful job. Now, I know you do landscapes, you do a lot of other things, but your architecture work is extraordinary. So where does that all come from?
Well, I came from a family that my dad was a builder, my brother was an architect. We always had architecture books on the coffee table, and I grew up in Europe, so I'm always in great spaces. And I began to realize, how important space is to everything, to where we are. So I'm very sensitive to that. And I initially wanted to go into art, and then thought it should be more practical to go into architecture. But I ended up being somewhere in between the two by being an architectural illustrator.
So what does an architecture illustrator do?
Well, in a word, an architectural illustrator will visualize what hasn't yet been built and make it seem real, that it already exists in space.
So what's that process like? So you're working with the architects, and they ask you to do a rendering of a building on the city square in Indianapolis, or wherever, Rome, and do they actually give you a drawing that they've done and then you illustrate it, or do you help them develop the concept of what should be done?
Well, a lot of that comes into play. There are different things about approaching it, but initially, the main thing about it is that the architect's already worked out the footprint, where the building's going to sit in space, and what the elevation looks like, how many floors.
The elevation is the outside.
Right.
Yeah.
It's the sides of the building. There would be a north elevation, a south elevation. And there are tricks in order to create those drawings in a three-dimensional way, using perspective and where you stand, and how high you are, and looking at things. There's bird's eye views and all those sort of things.
Mm-hmm.
But that's how it used to be. Now with computers, there's a program, usually it's SketchUp, that will give you a massing of the building, how many floors it is, where it is. And then with Google Earth, you can set that massing model right on a satellite image of the space.
Really?
And then they put in a topography, so you can get the valleys and the creeks and all that. And then my part is to sort of trace all that and to make it look believable without all the different media combined. The early part of your question is like, what is the point of all that? Is to basically give a sense of reality to what the building's going to look like, what's it made of, what's around it, and what's the life of it. And putting in trees and people and everything, that's called entourage. And what that is supposed to do is to get you emotionally excited about the project that's not yet built.
Well, and emotion, as we both know, is a terrific thing to learn as a painter. And figuring out how to make your paintings feel emotional and to make them come to life is a bit of a challenge. How does one do that?
It's, well, I think in architectural illustration, just about that, usually it's about creating like a happy day. You don't want to do a moody, rainy day in an architectural illustration. There's definitely a goal that you want it to be, to be shown in its best light. Happy people, lots of colorful awnings and retail. And that's one emotion, and it has a commercial application. In doing buildings that might be, a rainy day in Umbria, and there's reflections in the slate of the piazza, and there's clouds coming in. You can paint that, and it's really, really emotionally charged, and it's just a different kind of emotion. And the tricks are all basically the kind of using watercolor in particular for the things that it's really good at. It's like bleeds, where it's glowing effects, reflections, all that kind of thing.
Now, when I look at your work, it feels to me like you have really great control. Yet when I think of watercolor, I don't think of it as a medium that's easy to control. So how do you blend those? How do you get the control in an uncontrollable medium?
Well, I love that question, Eric, because I go back and forth with that. When is it too controlled and when is it loose enough? And when do you want those little accidents to happen? And, I'm trying to wean myself off of the technical, professional, commercial architectural illustration skills and get more into the more impressionistic part. And then sometimes I get a request to do a commercial project, and I have to turn that one off and put my, a more technical hat on. Thankfully, a lot of my clients like them a little bit loose, and I can kind of stick to that impression of the building, because the advantage of that is to not spell it all out right away. If you haven't figured it all out, you just want to get the gist of it. And that's usually a better way to go than doing a complete computer rendering that has every nut and bolt in it, because then you've gone down the wrong path sometimes and you have to restart over. I always like that tension between what's good, accurate information and what is just the spirit of the building you're doing. Or if it's, architecture is everything. It's a skyline of a city. It's underneath a freeway. There's the scaffolding. All of that's architecture, and being on a ship is architecture. So there's a thing of like making it look like it floats and believable, but at the same time, there's the beauty of shadows, going across curved surfaces, and then your basic design considerations of, is this a good composition? Is this capturing the sense of light? Is this capturing depth? Those sort of things.
So when you go out, you're a plein air painter. So when you go out plein air painting, which is outdoor painting, of course, for those who might not know, what is your process like? You find a spot that you want to paint. What do you do?
Finding the spot, that is always an interesting, you can drive around forever looking for that. And what I like to tell myself and tell my students is, I'm looking not for a painting, I'm not looking for a picture, I'm looking for a problem to solve. And that is, what are you not good at? What are you uncomfortable with? Kind of find that out, because when you're doing that, your brain is like much more alert, instead of like, oh, this is a good composition, everything's there, it's generally acceptable, but I kind of fall asleep in the middle of those paintings.
Because you've done it a million times.
That, and it's kind of, what's my impression to it? Yeah, it's a good picture, but what can I get my teeth into on this? What's the challenge here? Is it an unattractive subject? Is it complicated? Is it difficult? Is it like wet mud? How do I do that? How do you get that? And so it's a problem, and then you address it.
Well, and that keeps your brain sharp and keeps you growing and keeps you excited about it. Yeah. So do you have a particular thing that you tend to like to do, or is it pretty much you just kind of caught by the moment and you're driving around and going, all right, that one looks tough?
Yeah, I should probably have a bumper sticker on the back of my car saying I break for unusual compositions. But usually it would be it can be just an effect of light. Something like a metal corrugated siding on a barn may catch my eye, and usually if it's kind of beat up, I tend to like those sort of things too.
Rusty and
brand new developments have never really stopped me too much. Not to say that there isn't a possibility there, I just haven't seen it yet.
Yeah, well, that makes sense. And are you drawn to also doing landscapes without architecture in them? Do you ever do that? Are there limits to what you like to do or don't like to do?
I don't like to think so. I'm definitely drawn to a lot of other things besides architecture. In a way, though, I look at, say, really common composition would be, water, babbling brook coming down rocks, the things you see up in the Adirondacks and things like that. Well, those rocks are architecture when you think about it. They're forms, light falls on them in different planes, and then working the water into it and to try to give this sensation of wet rock as opposed to dry rock. Like one of my favorite painters, John Singer Sargent's, his alligators drying themselves. It's what's powerful about that. I've never come across a group of alligators like that. But what I love about that is the impression of light that's on those alligators, and most of it's white of the paper that's giving me the sense of them. And there's so much movement, and there's bouncing light. And when you see something like that, it could be, a tree that's been knocked over. It could be hay bales. I like all that stuff.
Yeah, I can tell you where to find alligators. I know exactly where to tell you how to find alligators if that's important to you to try.
Are you in Austin? Is that
No alligator. I can find rattlesnakes in Austin, but no, definitely, in Florida, definitely I can tell you where to go for that.
Ideally, they come up right up to the golf ball.
Yeah. So you have you and I got to know each other a little better this week. We've known each other for a while because you won the plein air salon art competition, which is a pretty big deal, in 2014.
That's right. Yeah.
And how did that change your life, or did it?
I'd have to say it made a big difference. It was a surprise. I'd liked getting involved in the competition, and I did win a painting. It was a watercolor. It wasn't the one that was selected for the grand prize, but it was another painting I did of a crane, I think. And when I saw like a lot of the runner-ups coming up at the conference, I'm thinking, well, that's it. When they've gone past like third place or best of this or best that. I don't know how many categories we had in 2014. We got a lot more now. But I figured, well, that's it. I'm out of the running. And then I think it came up. An accidental slide came up and then went down. And it came up. And was that my painting? And then when it came up, I was sitting next to who was it? It was McPherson.
Kevin McPherson.
Kevin McPherson, yes. And I was kind of like a little starstruck with him sitting there. And then I kind of looked at him and was like, no way. And went up there. So it was really exciting. And then afterwards, there was a request to judge shows. There was requests to do workshops and demos. And accepted into a lot of plein air events. And it was a real thrill.
Well, what I thought was interesting in our dialogue is that you had been doing this architectural work for a long time, and then decided on some of your time off to get into some of the plein air competitions. And that's kind of how you made your entry into this whole world, is it not?
That's right. Yeah, I was in Annapolis and I saw all these people with easels going around painting, and I thought, well, I can do this. I'll go get my easel and join you people, and there's prizes, and there's sales, and one artist, I don't remember who it was, said, no, you have to go through a process. You can't just join in with these things. You have to apply, you have to do this and that. And so, well, where do you hear about these things? And they just, well, you go online, and I'm like, online, what's that?
Yeah.
I wasn't too computer literate, so I found out about a few of them, and then I realized, these things are going on all over the country, and that I didn't know that in California they've been doing it for 20 years. So it was a whole new world, and the people that I met were like, I was saying, it's like, these are my people.
Yeah.
This is my tribe. I love this. And
there's something special about people who do plein air painting. I deal with a lot of artists and a lot of different types of artists. And it seems to me that the people who do plein air painting are the happiest. And that's probably because they're outdoors and they're painting and they're doing what they love. I don't know. What do you think it is?
I think it's all that. I think that the problems associated with painting, I think are pretty much at a certain level. If you've been doing it, you're really engaged in that. And I think it, for the time that you're painting, I think it does this sort of Zen thing to your mind, and it just calms down, and you're at a certain point of satori, you know, and you're really focused, and I think that's good for your body anyway, to be focused on something.
Well, the other thing that I think is interesting is that, there are, and I've heard this story so many times, is that you have somebody who's been painting from photographs their whole life, and by the way, I'm not down on painting from photographs, but someone who's painted from the photographs in their studio their whole life, and then all of a sudden they get motivated for whatever reason to go outside and start painting, they almost have to relearn how to paint again, because it changes everything, because a photograph, a typical photograph, if this is in focus, it blows out the sky. If the sky's in focus, it darkens the foreground, the shadows are darker, everything's different. But when you get outside, you really see things differently.
Yeah, no, I'm loving this conversation, because that is a huge difference. With the photograph seems to dictate what you're supposed to be doing, and everything is frozen in time with the camera. And the camera's eyes see very well. The technology is amazing, but there's no comparison to the human eye. And the human eye can pick up things and make adjustments with light and dark all the time. When you look into the shadows, look into the bright light, you're making decisions about how this is all looking. And I think working from photographs can be good for your drawing skills. I think it can be good for a lot of different things. But if you've been painting outdoors, you can take that experience and bring it to your photographs and make your photographs seem more alive when you're doing a painting. I think the thing with the shadows moving, or with cars going by or people going by, that in the process of painting outdoors, there's that element of time going by, and things can start to happen that you never would have anticipated, that can suddenly create a narrative in your painting, or it creates a new subject, that you didn't anticipate when you first set up your easel. And I think that's one of the things that an artist that I really loved, who passed away not too long ago, Charles Reed, always said that the painting that you're going to end up with is really not the point. It's the happening experience of painting itself. That is the art. That's the experience you're having.
Interesting.
And I try not to think about, I got to come away with something that's good or interesting. The fact that you're doing that is the artistic expression.
Yeah, I find that the process is half the fun, and challenging and frustrating and maddening sometimes, but it's the process that's what it's all about. And I find that when I do plein air paintings, I can't part with those because they're important memories to me. I'll take that painting and do a studio painting from it, or sometimes the same size for somebody, but I want to keep it because I want to remember that day, that light, that thing that happened, and every single time it's something. A deer jumps in front of you, or a woodpecker or something is gnawing at the tree. There's always something.
Yeah, a funny story. I was painting something, and I can't remember what it was exactly. The only thing I remember about the story was that I saw this shape behind me, like just over my shoulder. I didn't really fully turn around, and I just had this feeling it was somebody watching me paint. So the whole time I'm painting, I'm thinking I'm kind of on stage here, and I was trying to really kind of be impressive and doing all this stuff. And after I took a break, it sort of turned around, and it was a stump of a tree. So I had this whole thing going on in my head. And the point of all that was that that it's just, there's like ridiculous stuff that happens, that you make things go on in your head that's not really.
I thought you were going to say it was a bear and that you lost an ear. Or
it's just a shape that I thought was a person. Yeah, I mean, there's this in the example in the video. I'm using a plein air sketch that I did while I was in Italy, and at the time. The sketch captures a lot of information. The palette is something you liked and everything else, and I can remember the students behind me, what's going on, the lunch that we just had, the wine, the children playing in the piazza. I can look at that painting and it all comes back in a heartbeat. I can make another painting from it and enhance things, change the composition, and focus on a good painting. But it's like there's no substitute for that.
It loses some of that soul, some of that important memory. I think that when we first start painting, when we begin our journey as a painter, part of our process, I wouldn't say this is true for everybody, it was certainly true for me, is I thought the goal was to make a painting a photograph, right? I thought the goal was to make my painting as good as the photograph and to render it exactly and I find a lot of students kind of start out that way. Mm-hmm. What is your goal when and did you start that way? Did you kind of start thinking about, am I trying to replicate a photograph or am I trying to be, a little bit more artistic?
Yeah, I think I started out that way. I started thinking about, but watercolor kind of defies your ability to do that very well. I mean, because of your flexibility to change colors around and really get the accuracy there. Having the painting up on an easel, the paint kind of puddles a certain way. And I liked that. I liked the look of that. But I also felt like a certain obligation to paint everything in front of me without edits. Everything's like I'm painting, like I should get a medal or something for leaving the fire pole in there when you don't really need that. And I did that forever until I realized that I'm not bound by any of those rules. What do I need to take out? What do I need to put in that will enhance the painting? And then it got more for me, it got more about the abstract nature of painting. And what are these shapes and why does one composition more pleasing than another? And what can I extract from what I'm looking at? And we were talking about a painting the other night about, what are the things that you can do with the medium that you have that really delights the eye? The way color floods into another, or the cleanness of a white wall, these harmonies that you can start to create. And you can start to just use nature as a skeleton to start from, but then you leave it alone and then keep building something up that's uniquely yours and uniquely exciting.
You teach a lot of workshops. You have a lot of students. What are the most common problems that students suffer with that you typically are trying to help them overcome?
Great question. Everybody's different. But I think probably the most common is that same thing about we talked about earlier about what are my goals? And I think people are very unclear about what their goals are for a painting. Is it to paint photographically? Is it painting realism? Am I painting to be a sort of photojournalist with my paintings and capture the moment? Those are things I think you need to clarify as a student. Is what do I want to achieve in this? And if you can answer that question, it's usually better to make your goals more attainable, because you can't compete with nature. You can't compete with a camera. And I know people try and do a really, really good job, but then you get to that point, they say, why don't you just use the camera?
Right. What are the voices in your head when you're painting, and in what ways do they help you, and in what ways do they hurt you?
I think the voices there's a lot of them in there, screaming for attention. But I think one of them it's like I'm in my happy place, and there's a sort of confidence that you're doing what you love to do. If an athlete knows he can run and hurdle something at the same time, he's done it so many times that confidence keeps him going and doing that. The others is sort of the judgment on your shoulder of you're not good enough, you're sloppy, these kind of things, and I try to shake those out. To be honest with you, I mean, I think that self-incrimination thing comes in there, and then the other is kind of like a sort of a prodding to push yourself a little bit harder than you usually do. Don't go into automatic pilot and just call this one in, so to speak, and try to discover something new. Don't make this I'm out plein air painting again. You know, it's if you're hating what you're doing, it's okay to stop and trash it, or ask yourself why am I hating it? What else is going on? You know.
Yeah, I find that sometimes in those moments, I just have to take a break. You know, you can be intensely painting outdoors or indoors for a while, and then you're struggling, and you can't get through it. And, you know, sometimes my instinct is just to take a knife to it, you know, but it just getting away seems to matter sometimes. What is it about you that no one would ever find out if they Googled your name and they tried to search the internet to find something about you that no one else knew? What is something that nobody knows about you that you can reveal at this moment that you can talk about, that you want people to remember?
Well, what is something that I don't know if this comes out of us. I do like the notion of pretense, of pretending to be somebody that I'm not in a way. And it's, I like to think that I'm authentic and genuine, and this is who I am. But I think that in getting through, like in a painting or in art or public speaking or something, I'm trying to pretend to be somebody that really knows how to do that, you know, and it gets me through that stuff.
So is that faking the confidence?
It is. It's kind of like you fake it till you make it sort
Right.
of thing. And there's also, I'm envious of other painters that I admire their style, and I wish I had that. But they already own it, so now I have to figure out who I am, and I've got to do my style. And
Which you've done.
and I think so. I think I've got a look that I like, and I enjoy the painting, and I still have a lot of envy and admiration for other painters that have like phenomenal styles. You know,
I think that's right. How do you find your style as a painter? I get that question a lot.
It's a great question, and there's no easy answer for that.
Does your style find you?
In a way, I think it's find out what you like. You know, it's like who we like in our friends is something that had to do with our natures and what our style is. I think I've combined a lot of the painters that I like and just spread them out, prints all over the floor, and start seeing like what is the thread that's running through all those different paintings. You know, just with watercolor, for example. And I said, well, I know what it is. It's sort of the sense of suggestion. I think I like that better than I do real definitive watercolor. So I can narrow my style down to at least that. And then maybe in approaching the paint, the medium, I'm trying to find out a dialogue between me and the paint. And then I say, well, this is what I like it when it does that. This is what I like it. I don't like it when it does that, and these sort of things. And so in that judgment and my evaluations of that, somehow I think your style starts to come out. And you could start by copying, you know, the people that you really admire, like a Sargent or Homer or Wyeth or something like that. And then there's a kind of a point where your palette's sensitivity changes and becomes more, you prefer a certain kind of color range. You prefer more color or less color, and then you sort of settle into that. But the only way to really find that out is like over and over and over, is practice and practice, and just go through a lot of paper.
I like your idea, though. I like the idea, you know, there are paintings that resonate with me, and they have a strong emotional reaction, but I've never really stopped to ask why. And I think it's a great idea to take, every time you see a painting, you say, okay, I'm going to put that one in a folder, and then lay out the folder and say, okay, all of these paintings have something that resonates with me. What is it? What is it? You know, what do they have in common? Because that might help you identify what resonates with you. And if it's resonating with you, it's probably something you want to be willing to paint, I would think.
And then do it with your own work too.
Yeah.
You start laying down a couple of years of it and say, well, what's showing up the most? You know, and is that something you like?
Yeah.
And that's probably going to start to define your file. I think your style. I don't know that you can consciously go after it. Like, I'm going to come up with a new style that nobody else has. I'm sure that's done, but in a way, it's sort of like the way you write your name is your own.
Yeah, I was going to say that is your signature. You know, when I was a kid, I'm sure we all, you know, we'd figure out what our signature is going to be and we'd practice it. And then over a lifetime, it kind of becomes whatever it is. And I think painting is the same way. You know, you use your strokes about the same way and you do things about the same way, and it kind of becomes your signature. I know when I'm judging art shows, sometimes I can go into that show, even though I ask him to cover up the signatures, I can say, that's a Kevin McPherson, and that's a Walt Gonski, and that's a Stewart White. And because their paintings become who they are. Just a thought.
Yeah, no. I think
So
that's
you
very valid.
mentioned Sargent. Would he be your all-time favorite watercolor painter?
I would have to say, I mean, yes. I'm not alone in that. I feel like I've got a lot of other supporters in that.
Yeah, well, I would say.
I really admire the work of the Australian watercolorist Joseph Zbogich.
Yeah.
And a lot of people do. And he's one of those people like, oh, I'm so tempted to paint like that, and because I admire his style. But there's things I can get from his work that I can make it my own way of doing things. And I'm constantly finding out about other artists that I've never heard of before that I love their style. Nobody comes to mind right now.
That's one of the beauties of the internet and of social media is that your discovery of painters around the world is, you know, you can just go on Instagram and start scrolling through the feed, and all of a sudden you see something and you meet someone who you've never before known.
Oh, there's a guy from, I think he's out of Taiwan, Xiancheng Wei.
Yeah.
Oh, man, I love his style. There's something about that, and I want to know what kind of paper are you using, what kind of brushes. I want to know all that stuff, you know. And I've been lucky enough to be invited to some international events, and that's where you get to meet a lot of painters.
You went to China, didn't you?
I did. I went to Shenzhen.
Yeah. So tell me about that, because I understand the plein air movement and the watercolor movement in China are massive.
It's well, watercolor's got a wonderful ancient tradition in the East, and the language of the brush is just a really big deal. I mean, just look at the writing, you know, the calligraphy there. I think that experience for me was, one was culturally rich, and it was great to meet other people. The support that the community in Shenzhen, the government puts a lot of value on their painters, and yeah, they have like national treasures. There are these watercolor painters, so that's always wonderful to see. And I enjoyed the camaraderie. It's something that binds us more than anything else in that community. It's not our politics. It's not anything other than our love of watercolor, and that's our community.
Yeah, well, this is the fun thing too, is you discover there's a big family where we have a lot of things in common, right? When you go on a trip like that, an international trip, or you even online, you find that we may disagree politically or religiously or some other way, but we are all one when it comes to our passion for our art, and that's a beautiful thing, and it overcomes those other barriers.
Yeah, I mean, it really does. And how a person paints and what they're interested in. Like if I see an architectural painting done by somebody in China, I have this newfound admiration for, oh, that's how you pulled off that night scene, and that's how you did, a heavy traffic jam. And I love how you, just completely, sort of scrubbed out this one area. I mean, just techniques that I would never think of. And yeah, so we have that thing in common.
So someday, when you're no longer on this earth, what do you want people to remember about you?
Man, I would like to be thought of as a pretty nice guy.
Well, I'm sorry, that's not possible.
Yeah, there's probably some people that'll come back and haunt me on that. I would say it artistically, that I painted authentically. That I painted. That I figured out who I was as a painter, and was comfortable with that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's what I would like.
And that's a great place to end. Stewart White, thank you very much for doing this.
I really love this. Thank you, Eric.
All right. Well, our guest was Stewart White. Thank you for watching today. I'm Eric Rhodes, publisher of Fine Art Connoisseur and Plein Air magazine. Well, that is Stewart White, and the video is called Architecture in Watercolor, but of course it applies to architecture in any kind of painting. You can learn more about it at streamline.art. And remember, we have a discount code for you up in the comments section today. Well, thank you for watching.
Hi, I'm Stewart White, and welcome to my watercolor demo. In this demo, I'm going to show you how to paint architecture with watercolor confidently and with a plan. What I think is holding a lot of people back in watercolor is the lack of confidence in starting out on a big white sheet of paper. Also, I think what's holding back in doing architecture is being able to handle all the different details, perspective, and the different angles. And forgetting that the main point of painting architecture is painting the light. Light is the main thing that we want to get out of this video. What's unique about my demo is that I'll be able to show you how to analyze architecture, how to break it down into its simplest forms, how to take complicated detail and make it readable, understandable, and yet very easy to do. I think the artists that would get the most out of this are those artists that love to paint either a well-known landmark or a modest little country village or a turn in the street. It's not as complicated as you think. Most things in life aren't. We just make them very complicated in our own heads. I think when you see that, I can put together a painting. I'm pretty sloppy when I paint, but actually it all kind of comes together. You just need to follow the paint and see what it wants to do. So join me as we explore painting architecture in watercolor.